Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing the next review in my self-published Spotlight series. I think this is number 4 now, so that's exciting. The book that I read for this review was In the Shadow of Ruin by Tony Debajo. Tony, I am so sorry if I said your name wrong, but I think I said it right, but please correct me if it is wrong, because that's bad. But anyway, Tony reached out to me last year. He offered to send me a copy of his book, and after I read the blurb of it, I was like, yes, definitely. It is an African-inspired grim dark fantasy book. I believe it's the first book in a trilogy. I have to say this book was wild, like in all the best ways. Now, before I jump into my review, I'll just give a very quick synopsis of what this book is about. Now, this book centers around a rivalry between two brothers, King Jide and Prince Olise, his half-brother, and an ensuing war. Now, Jide rules the lands of the Yoruba, which are threatened by Olise. And so it's about the story of how these two brothers have come to be in that situation. And then we actually see them in that situation. There are time jumps. We have two stories, essentially. We have how we got here and then the here. So without further ado, I'm now going to jump into my review. Now, this book is wonderful. I really enjoyed it. This book is you can probably gather from the little short summary that I gave, you know, it's about family, it's about brotherhood, about loyalty, about revenge, about justice. It's a very multi-layered book. Like, there's a lot happening, but it happens in a way that feels very logical. Like, it doesn't feel like it's just being done for shock value, which is something that I really dislike in my fantasy books. And unfortunately, I think it happens too often in fantasy books because obviously the author wants to keep the reader engaged. But I think the reason why I love this book, one of the reasons why I love this book, is the fact that it feels like a really authentic reflection of like a family drama, but like set in a fantasy world. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. Like, I wasn't really expecting to kind of get this multi-layered perspective about this family, but then there's other layers to it as well, because we get insight into the society and the issues in the society, the socioeconomic, the cultural, the religious issues that are prevalent in this world. It doesn't feel like you're getting like a treatise on it. It's just Tony's storytelling has a wonderful ability to make it feel like you're just watching this family unfortunately unravel, but then there's these kind of like other layers to it that really enrich it, if that makes sense. It's wonderful. I haven't read a fantasy book that has done that in a while. I think maybe the last thing that I read that did that exceptionally well was probably one of the Joe Abercrombie books that I read, because I think he does that really well, but not just on the family. Obviously he's focusing on many different characters. But anyway, if you're looking for a book that's just about so much more than just like good versus bad, then I think this is a really good book, because it is about so much more than that. It is about just about dynamics and how those dynamics can ultimately lead to really terrible consequences, which is something that I'm always very interested in. I'm always interested in how my actions towards anybody, never mind just my family, impact like things further down the line. I don't know. I've always found that interesting. The next thing that I really loved about it was the characters. Characters were really great. Like, we follow Jide, who, as I mentioned, is the king. He's a natural leader. He's a strong man. He's self-assured. He's incredibly honorable. He's very oriented towards his family. But then he has this inner battle about, you know, whether he did enough for his family, given that he was also ruler. You know, how can you balance those two things effectively, if ever? And then we have Olise, the prince, who is the person that he's fighting against, his half-brother. He's obviously very smart, but he's quite snivelly, you know, he's quite snide, self-entitled. He's a bit of a spoiled brat. You can kind of see where this conflict comes from, right? Like, one is, you know, jealous of the other, and it's you know, I don't really blame him. Jide is awesome. Like, he's such a cool guy. Like, totally love to be friends with him. And then the next 3 characters that I will mention are his sons, so Jide's sons. We have Enitan, who is the youngest, then we have Niran, who's the second child, and then we have Toju, who is the oldest son. Now, they all kind of fit an archetype. Enitan is a bit of a misfit, you know, he's He kind of just does his own thing. Very resourceful, very smart, but very independent. And then we have Niran, who's the middle child. He's very intelligent, very diplomatic, very politically astute, but will always take the path of least physical resistance. He doesn't want to resort to violence if he can help it. He will always like to go through diplomacy first. In contrast, we have Toju, who's the oldest, and he's the complete antithesis of that. He's very much like, no, we need to show force. We need to show force straight away and show that we're not weak. They all kind of fit like a specific archetype. They all have distinct personalities, and each one of them has strengths and weaknesses in their own way, which I really liked. My personal favorite is a toss-up between Niran and Enitan. I do like the independent, free-spirited young one because that's me. So I can identify. And then the middle child, Niran, I also really like. I really like book-smart, intelligent characters. I don't mind the fighter. Like, I love a good fighter character as well, but it's got to be my least favorite, I think. I like it when you have like somebody who's really like politically astute, but like not in a manipulative way. We follow some other characters who essentially act as like the partners to each of the sons. They're called blood guards. They're essentially the people who are tasked with protecting each of the sons right from when they're younger. But that happens with everybody, by the way. It's not just the sons. Anybody who I think is in like a position of royalty or aristocracy, they get a blood guard when they're very young. I really liked all of the blood guards. Like, they're just kind of like extensions of each of the individuals. I just like the banter. Like, you know, you guys know me by now. Like, I love a good bit of banter in my books, and the banter was great. The only thing I will mention is that there weren't tons of like female characters. I mean, we have Jide's wife, the queen, whose name I've completely forgotten. She was great. I just wish we'd got more time with her, to be honest, because she's like a really strong woman, and all her sons like really love her, and his, you know, Jide loves her as well, and she's, you know, got this really wonderful inner strength. It's just, I wish we'd just seen more of her. But also I understand that you can't get in time with every single character, but who knows? I think I've got a really strong feeling that there's going to be some amazing female characters developing and coming in later on in the series, so I'm really excited to see that. In terms of what else I liked, I really loved the politics. There's a lot of politics in this book about, you know, kind of different tribes and clans. So if you like good politics, then you're definitely going to get that from this story. This is another one of these books that I could definitely see it being adapted. It's just incredibly vivid. Narrative is written extremely well. I also really like the way that Tony added in the flashbacks, because I'm not a massive fan of flashbacks. I often find that they take me out of the story, but the way that he did it was just perfect. We kind of get these little vignettes at the end of like certain chapters that go back in time. It just kind of paints the picture from like a third party perspective. It actually kind of reminds me of The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker, actually, a little bit, now that I think about it. Very different, so don't expect the same thing, but it kind of reminds me of it, the essence of it and the way that he did it. So if you like that, maybe you'll enjoy this. Also, as it relates to writing, I just really like the way that everything kind of came to fruition by the end. Like, the pacing is really good. There were a few little slow parts for me, nothing major. It is one of those books where, like, by the end of the book, that ending is really satisfying and everything lines up in a way that it needs to be lined up. And I love it when that happens. Last but not least, what else I really enjoyed was the African lore. So I don't know tons about African mythology or lore. Unfortunately, it's just not something that I've read really anything about. I don't know tons about the Yoruba, so my knowledge was obviously very limited. But I have to say, when I was reading the book, it just felt really authentic. Like, it felt really authentic. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I've read fantasy books in general, not even just fantasy, where it's very obvious that the writer doesn't really know that much about the lore or the mythology that they're writing, or where they've got that lore and mythology from is probably just from some history books. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with that, but you can generally tell that it's very obvious that Tony knows what he's talking about, and the way that he weaves it into the story is just beautiful. If you're looking for something different, then this is, you've got to give this a go, because who doesn't want African-inspired fantasy? Like, who doesn't? Like, please point to me to that person. It is quite dark. It's quite dark. I wouldn't say it's the darkest book I've ever read, but it's very violent. Like, there's definitely descriptions of like pretty violent scenes. So if you don't want that, maybe be be aware of that going into it. But it's not the darkest book that I've ever read, but it's also not the lightest book that I've ever read. So I would say it's somewhere in the middle when it comes to the grim dark scale. So maybe just kind of keep that in mind. In terms of what didn't work for me, so I mentioned one of them, which is that it was a little bit slow in parts, but I understand why it was slow in those parts. So I can be very, very forgiving of that. And I have a feeling that it's probably not going to be like that in the coming books because there's just so much that's set up now. The second thing was that it is an extension of one of the things that I loved, which is I loved the politics and I just wanted more of it. Like there were specific chapters where we got discussions with specific tribes and clansmen and leaders, and I just loved those bits so much. Those were my favorite bits because, as we all know, I love politics in my books. So Tony, if you haven't written the second book yet, I really hope there's more politics in it because I loved it, and I think Tony does a wonderful job of integrating the politics in, and I personally think that's quite hard to do, so kudos. So as mentioned before, I don't give ratings on self-published books, but let's just say this one rates very highly, if you couldn't tell. I cannot wait to read book 2. I don't know when it's coming out. Tony, if you're watching this, let me know. But I really enjoyed it. Like, I really, really enjoyed it. I think if you're looking for something that's in a different world to what you're used to experiencing, if you're looking for really beautiful prose, if you're looking for really interesting characters, then I think you've got to pick this book up. So let me know if you've read it. I don't really know anybody who's read it, but if you have read it, let me know. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. You should go and pick it up because you can't really go wrong, in my opinion. Like, this is one of those books where, like, I don't think you could go wrong. I think a lot of people will like it. Just be aware of the fact that it is a bit dark in places. So use your own judgment on that. All right, folks, hope you enjoyed the review. Any questions, as always, let me know down below in the comments and I will see you there. Stay safe, everybody. Oh, before I finish,